This episode of the BPOS podcast is sponsored by Cuvée Coffee. For 26 years, Cuvée's been Texas' premier coffee roaster, sourcing the highest quality beans, roasting to exacting standards, and delivering fresh and straight to your door. Go to CuvéeCoffee.com and use code BPOS for 20% off your first order. That's CuvéeCoffee.com, code BPOS for 20% off your first order. Cuvée is for people who get up and get after it because it's always 5 a.m. somewhere. Welcome back to the BPOS podcast. As always, if you are watching on Spotify, YouTube, listening on Apple, please subscribe, leave comments, rate. It really helps the podcast. It helps us get the word out there. And I always read any comments that you send me personally, so I do appreciate them. Today, I'm joined by somebody who a mutual friend has put us in contact together. And Chris, we don't know each other. We've had a couple email conversations back and forth, but, today we're going to get to know each other.
You bet.
I have, dove into your story, and thank you for sharing those seminars that you did. A lot of great information out there, and I'm really excited to have you share it with our listeners.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too, Mike. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and I've got to admit, I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm an electrical engineer, retired now, but, I have spreadsheets for everything.
Right.
And but I kept a journal, especially right after I lost my wife, Jill. That was back in the summer of 2020. But part of it's been fascinating to me, to almost an out-of-body experience of watching what happened to me and how I progressed and the things I struggled with, the things that helped me. And so I found that for me, it helps me personally just sharing my story. It's therapeutic.
Yeah.
But also I've talked to a lot of friends and some other folks that I've met, and it seems to help them as well.
Yeah.
So if you want, I'll jump right in.
I would love that.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Well, so my wife, Jill, and I were married for 36 years.
Wow.
A great, great marriage.
Yeah.
No kids, though.
Okay.
We wanted kids, just waited too long. And 4th of July, 2020, she was fine. A couple days later, she started feeling a little ill, stomach issues, and we didn't think much of it, but she kept getting worse. And so back then, that was the COVID lockdown.
Right.
We did a telehealth with her doctor, and her doctor said, well, we can't rule out COVID, but if you're home, we don't want you to come in because you can put other people at risk. But if you get worse, call me in a week.
Okay.
And so she just kept getting worse and starting to get dehydrated. And it was about a week and a half. I called her doctor and said, she's really not doing well. I mean, she was in good spirits. We kept thinking any day she might turn.
Right.
She was always healthy as a horse.
Yeah.
So it was kind of weird thinking she might have caught COVID and I didn't. But anyway, the nurse said, yeah, it sounds like she's dehydrated. You better bring her in. We'll give her an IV. That'll help her.
Okay.
And, knowing what I know now, she had a heart attack on the way to the hospital. They revived her body, but at that point, we didn't know if she was still there mentally.
Wow.
And long story short, 24 hours later, I had to take her off life support.
Man, that is, that's a lot in a very short period of time.
2 weeks, just 2 weeks.
Jeez.
And we don't really know what happened. They did find cancer. Some people I've talked to thought it might have been pancreatic cancer because it can happen quickly like that. Hindsight, now I look back, I could tell now that she was losing some weight, but we were in the lockdown. We didn't think anything of it. So needless to say, it was a shock and I was devastated. She was my purpose in life. I had, no kids, have some friends and family, good friends, but, all of a sudden I'm alone. and I have this huge void ripped in my life. So yeah, the early impact of the grief that we bear when something like this happens was really kind of amazing. You know, I couldn't sleep, you know, that kind of thing. And my wife and I were opposites. She'd get upset she couldn't eat. If I was upset, I had a voracious appetite.
Right.
My stomach would eat me alive if I didn't fill it. But what fascinated me is I was literally taking twice the caloric intake that I normally take, and I lost 20 pounds. And I have a thin frame, so that was a lot.
Do you have any idea, like, why? Like, physically, why that happened?
Well, it's, I think, the psychosomatic effects of the mind over your body, and that, you know, with grief as deep as that, you know, the stress, you know, it's translated into stress,
Right.
and your body's just going a mile a minute. And, you know, you're not even really aware of it. That's what amazed me is I knew I was hungry, but it just, I thought it was crazy that I lost weight like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And just to be clear for everybody that's listening, we do not suggest the grief diet as a way to lose weight, right?
No,
Yeah, definitely not.
No, definitely not. But, and, you know, we'll talk a little more about this later, but I've become friends with a couple of professors of psychology and neuroscience, and there's some real science behind how your brain and your dominant thoughts affect your physical well-being.
Yep.
And so that's one of the things that we need to be cognizant of is, you know, as we're going through grief, it's not just the mental thing of being sad or, you know, lonely or all the things we go through. There's some real physical manifestations as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, and when I listened to one of the seminars that you put out, you know, you had touched on that, and that's something that nobody has talked about yet so far in this podcast. And, you know, my only experience with that is, you know, it sounds like my wife Rochelle is a lot like Jill in the sense that, you know, when we went through our trauma, she just had no appetite and didn't eat for weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which obviously that's not good either.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. And there were other progressions that I went through that, so like pictures, you know, right after Jill passed, I couldn't bear to look at any recent pictures of her. It just was too hard. What was interesting to me, though, is I was able to look at wedding pictures or pictures from vacation when we were young, and that didn't bother me. And I thought, well, in a way, it's kind of like she's still here and I'm just reminiscing.
Okay.
You know, and so, you know, that was okay, but it bothered me that I just couldn't stand to look at recent pictures. And what I found, though, is over time it got easier, and now it's been 4.5 years. Actually, the picture I used for her obituary, it was one of the latest pictures I had of her, a favorite picture. I love that picture now.
Yeah.
I actually have it on my night table, and so every morning I wake up, I see her smiling face, and it makes me happy to see her and smiling. So that was another transition that I went through.
Do you think, and I'm asking this because I know for me personally, when I look at pictures of my son, they make me sad because I know that there's no future pictures that we're going to make. Do you think that was kind of the same experience you had?
Yeah, I think so, Mike. Yeah, it really is, because it's reminding you that they're gone, and that there's, in a way, nothing to look forward to,
right,
of future pictures, future family get-togethers or vacations or all the things you do.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it really is, I think, because of that. And but what's comforting is that in time, or at least for me, I transitioned away from that, and now it reminds me of all the good times that we had together.
That's cool.
And yeah, and I think that's, kind of getting over that hump. It's a big one. I mean, I don't remember exactly how long, but it was probably at least 2 years before I started enjoying looking at, the recent pictures. And yeah, it's bittersweet. She's gone. I know that, but the positive side of it is just reminiscing over all the good times we had, and just and again, it's a psychological thing of focusing on the positive side of the coin. Which reminds me, one thing I've told people that seems to help is grief is hard. I mean, it really is hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And anybody that goes through it, we all can relate to that. But if you look at it in a way, it's born out of love. And the deeper the love, the deeper the grief. And so if you really, truly love somebody deeply,
it hurts.
It hurts,
yeah.
But it's a thing of beauty because it's born out of love. And so that's one of the things I found that helps me, like I said, looking at pictures, looking at the positive side of the coin, that, in a way, grief is a beautiful thing. If you didn't have love, you wouldn't have grief.
Yeah, somebody that was on the podcast a few months ago, she said that, and she didn't come up with this saying, but it's out there, grief is love with nowhere to go, right? And the first time she said that, I thought, wow, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So it's, kind of reminds me of how I started to transition and rebuild my life. But before I get into that, there's one other transition I went through, and that was dreams. And I mention that because I have a friend I met through a charity event. She's ex-military, and she's a little bit like a man. I'm the first one she ever opened up to.
Okay.
And she had lost her husband 2 years prior. And I asked her, I said, don't you have anybody that, you're close to, family? No, I'm stronger than that.
Right.
I'm not going to share my burden.
So that's what you mean by she's kind of like a man emotionally.
Emotionally,
yes, I got you. Yeah.
That men, we were raised, little girls cry, men don't.
Right.
And you tend to bottle it all up. So she's behind the curve really in her journey. But one of the things I shared with her, we were talking, and she was lamenting. In fact, she was really upset that her husband wasn't in any of her dreams. And I said, I went through the same thing with Jill. Now, at first, I wasn't dreaming at all, but part of it is you're just exhausted.
Yeah.
You're just totally wiped. But once I started dreaming, Jill was never in them. And I thought, why? I just didn't understand it. And then after a while, she started showing up. And so I told Barbara, my friend, that hang in there, he'll show up eventually. The problem is, and she experienced the same exact thing, when Jill first started showing up in my dreams, it was the old, well, can't we still just be friends? And so it was like she was there with me, but I couldn't put my arms around her.
Right.
The love was still there. And so in a way, it's your brain kind of processing and coping and dealing with what you're going through with grief. And my friend Barbara is now in that same phase of, now eventually my dreams transitioned to Jill was back and things were normal.
Wow.
And so, and that took probably 2 or 3 years before I got through all that. But
Man. I had one night I had a dream. Well, I've had 2 dreams that have had Connor in them. And the first one that I had, it was, those moving sidewalks in the airport.
Yeah.
So I was basically on a moving sidewalk and my family was with me. And the one on the other side, I glanced over and Connor was on it and he was going by. And I was trying to get my family's attention saying, there's Connor, there's Connor. And I remember when I woke up, I was so confused. I mean, I was like, it was such a weird experience. Yeah. So,
and I think that probably was similar to what I experienced. A little bit different because obviously you're not married to your son, but he was there. You just couldn't be with him.
Yep.
You know, he was passing the other way, and yeah. So the brain's a fascinating organ
it is.
in both the positive and the negative. So yeah, and now dreams. I'm kind of back to where I was, when we were first, before passing.
God, that's great, man. That gives me hope. That's wonderful.
And that's one of the things I found, Mike, is in sharing my story. Barbara took some comfort in that as well. Of just, okay, so this isn't abnormal. It happens to other people, and it's still hard. It doesn't make it any easier,
right.
But at least it gives you some comfort that I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going through the process of grief.
Yeah.
By the way, I mentioned my journal. When I first started it, I titled it My Journey Through Grief.
Right.
Well, now after, I think it was about 6 months, I'm like, no. I scratched out through and retitled it Journey with Grief.
Yeah. Grief
never leaves you.
Never.
And again, I look at it as a thing of beauty because of my deep love for Jill, and I'm happy with that. I don't want to forget anything about her. I don't want to just completely move on like she never existed. But it's always there, And as you could see, the more I talk, 4.5 years later, I still get choked up.
Absolutely,
it still affects me. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the steps I took on rebuilding my life. I mentioned Jill was my purpose in life, and all of a sudden I have no purpose. And, that would be very easy to just go into this downward spiral of nothing to look forward to. And so there are some things early on that you just have to do. Like I had to go to the grocery store. Like I said, I was hungry.
Right.
and I got to the grocery store, and it was, a few days after she passed, and I was really sad, wow, because we always shop together, or I shop for the two of us, and it kind of hit me that, wow, I'm just shopping for myself. And then I thought, yeah, but I can get anything I want.
That's one way to look at it. Yeah.
And I thought, well, okay, so, this isn't all bad. And so little things like that I kind of referred to as micro closures, of just doing something for the first time after you lose a loved one. It's a little bit of closure. There's other things, though, that you can put off. Like in the pantry, her favorite cereal was sitting there, and I couldn't stand to think of eating it. It's her cereal, and then at some point I thought, this is stupid. It's going to get stale,
right?
And so I went ahead and ate it.
Yeah.
And another little micro closure. So there's things like that you just experience going forward. But then there's bigger things that are like hurdles. So I have good friends down in Rockport that invited me down to get me out of the house.
Okay.
And this is the fall of 2020. And I really dreaded going because the last time I went was with Jill.
Right.
It was a beautiful day. We driving through the hill country and down through rural Texas. And we had a great time.
Yeah.
And driving down there, it was really, really hard. It reminded me of all that.
Yep.
And I got to see my friends, and, we hugged each other and shed tears together. But they took me out fishing, and I caught this big, beautiful black drum, and first black drum I'd ever caught.
Okay.
And I had this huge smile on my face. And it was the first time I had laughed since Jill's passing. And so hindsight, if I had just avoided going, I never would have gotten to the point of getting over that hump and having new experiences. Things that are without Jill clearly, but that were fun. And now I was there for Thanksgiving and had fun with their grandkids.
Right.
And so there's things like that that you put off that you really shouldn't, because it slows down your healing.
It does. I think I've talked to enough people. My experience has been, and a lot of other folks have agreed that they have a similar experience, that especially early on, anytime that I felt happy, I kind of felt guilty, and so anytime I would laugh, like immediately I would be like, what the hell are you doing? Like, so I'm not as bad at that now, but I know just, for what it's worth, for people that may be in the early stages, it's not abnormal to feel guilty when you're happy. Yeah.
And I'm fortunate I didn't go through that.
Wow.
But what I would say to that is, again, it's, to me, important for us to focus on the positive side of the coin.
Sure.
Connor doesn't want you to be sad.
No, absolutely.
He wants you to rebuild your life, to have fun, to laugh again.
Yep.
And we just got to keep that in mind, that it's not only okay, it's actually healthy. It's part of it's not just mental, it's physical healing. Remember, talking about the psychosomatics, the negative effects on our bodies. They say laughter is the best medicine, but in a way, it's true.
Sure.
And so, yeah, it's going to happen. And there are things that I talk about, getting over the hump and not avoiding. Well, one thing I really struggle with is going to the dentist.
Okay.
And, the reason is, well, part of my excuse was it's COVID, but it was an excuse. I waited over a year. And the reason is Jill and I was retired when she passed. We'd always go to the dentist together. And then afterwards, we'd go have lunch.
Yeah.
And it was just a fun time for us.
Yep.
Kind of took the sting out of having to go to the dentist, right? And so I just kept putting it off, because I knew it was going to be hard.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was starting to feel better, starting to see a parting of the clouds, et cetera. But I finally made myself do it. And yeah, there were tears, the finance gal at the dentist, she loved Jill. Everybody loved Jill. She touched a lot of hearts. And, we hugged each other and shed some tears. And then she started asking me about some of my trips and some of the stuff I'm going on, doing. And we fell right back into where we were before.
Wow.
So, yeah, I don't want to say getting over these humps is easy. It's not.
No.
It's not. It just, to me, it's something that accelerates our healing and our rebuilding. And I don't know if even healing's the right word. It's not like we have a cold or something.
Right.
It's not curable.
No.
Like we said, it's not going to go away. But I think it's important to really push yourself. I have another example. My dad passed a number of years ago, and his companion lived in the house. So, 10 years later, she was getting frail enough that she had to move out. So finally selling my dad's house in Florida remotely. Found a great realtor. We became good friends, and I told her my story and we got to talking. And she shared that her mom had lost actually it was her stepfather, her second husband. She lost her first husband many years ago, but he passed, and they lived in a town not too far away, but she refused to go back to the town because she just couldn't bear the grief.
Right.
The problem was my realtor's sister lived there with 2 little kids, and so she's not spending time with her grandkids and watching them grow.
Yeah.
And, I just look at that and think, what a waste, that if she could just force herself to get over that hump, to go and see how the kids are growing. And, and kids bring out the best in us, sometimes the worst. but we're all little kids at heart, I think.
Sure.
But that's an example of how you can really hurt yourself. At least you're healing and you're moving forward by not kind of pressing forward and trying to get over these humps.
Yeah, I would say it's a very consistent theme with people.
Yeah.
That grief waits for you, and if you don't, I mean, there are things you're just going to have to go through.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether you do them in a week or a year or 10 years. You're going to have to go through them. So I like that advice of just, for lack of a better term, ripping off the Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Letting air get to the wound,
Yeah.
it'll heal faster.
Yep.
Yeah. So those are all the kind of the things, the humps and, just kind of moving forward. And, but for me also, I had nobody, no purpose. And so what do I do with my life? Fortunately, my wife's still helping me to this day, because early in 2020, she finally talked me into doing an estate plan. I didn't even have a will because, financially,
wow.
we didn't have kids.
Yeah.
And financially we're secure. And I figured in Texas, everything goes to her. But she got to me. She was smart. She said, well, that's true. But what happens when we're both gone? All the money we worked so hard for and everything that we saved. And I'm like, okay, she got to me. So we went through the process, and we decided to both fund 2 charities each, fund them equally because we're equal partners. And I'm a nerd, so I decided to do scholarships for electrical engineering.
Okay.
At my alma mater, Carnegie Mellon, and then one here at UT Austin.
Awesome.
And my wife, with her heart, we love kids, so she picked Make-A-Wish.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Austin Humane Society.
Okay.
Now, I share that because she passed right before we had finished the estate plan, so I still had to go through probate and all that.
Right.
So I guess I should have gotten started earlier, but it all worked out. But then once you have the plan in place, you notify the charities that they're in your estate plan. And what happened was they started getting me involved in activities. And I found that I enjoyed that. Number one, it got me out of the house, started meeting some new people, making new friends, and found that I really got a lot of enjoyment out of it.
That's great.
And, it started with Jill's 2 charities, but then with the universities, I mentioned I'm working with a professor of psychology, which kind of blows me away that I always thought psychology is, I'm an engineer. I don't need that.
Right.
But, I'm funding a study for college kids and the stress they bear and how they can improve their academics. And so I've found, Mike, that just allowing myself to get engaged and again, it was hard to get started.
Right.
The first time I had lunch with the local CEO of Make-A-Wish, I had to tell her the whole story, shed some tears, and so in a way that was another hump I got over, but I am so glad I did it that now I'm busier than when I was working. And I have tons of friends, and, I'm just doing some great work. And so it really helped me rebuild my life. Now, I'll say, though, we're all different, and our paths are all going to be different.
Oh, for sure.
And so, it's not that I'm saying, hey, get involved in charities and everything will be better. It's, the key is to find what your interests are and force yourself to get engaged.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mentioned my friend Barbara, the extra Army. I've been encouraging her to get involved, and she says, well, I'm not a joiner. And I said, well, you don't have to join. You just go out once in a while, and you might find that there's something that you want to continue pursuing, or maybe you meet somebody, or maybe, Yeah, you go have coffee with somebody, those kinds of things. And so there's a saying I heard that I really like, and it's those of us that are Christians. God can't steer a parked car.
Right.
So you got to get behind the wheel and
Yeah.
give it, and just go try.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So that's really what helped me a lot. Again, hindsight being 2020. And I'll touch a little more on the religious aspect of it. It wasn't long after Jill passed. I mentioned I couldn't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
It's 2:00 in the morning. I'm in the pool floating on my back, and it's this beautiful moonless night, crystal clear, beautiful, beautiful sky with all the stars. And I'm floating there thinking, where's heaven at night? We always see these pictures of, puffy white clouds and angels and flowing white. We don't have a clue, but a couple of things that came out of that, now I kind of look at it as it was an epiphany of sorts, because it was the first time I felt a little comfort that someday, I knew Jill was in heaven. There's no question in my mind, and someday I'll be reunited with her.
Yeah.
And now, God willing, it'll be a long, long time from now.
Right.
I've told her I'm in no hurry.
Right.
But it did give me some comfort. And, some of my friends have asked me about, religion, is it a crutch? And I look at it, Mike, and I think, well, number one, there's a lot of good lessons that come out of, the Bible and, et cetera. But just having that sense of comfort, there's no harm in that, and so what if I'm wrong, that when I pass, I just fade into Never Never Land,
Right.
To me, for those that believe or want to believe, take some comfort in the promise that we'll be reunited. So rebuilding, that was a big part of my journey. It's taken, I think it was 6 months before I even started to feel good again, and starting to enjoy myself.
That's actually pretty fast.
I think in a way I was lucky.
Yeah.
Because, the interesting thing about charities is they're all like-minded. They're good people that want to help people.
Right.
And that's one of the things I found. We talked a little bit about men not sharing grief or other people not sharing grief. What I found, Mike, is that being open and sharing your grief and your struggles, people want to help. It brings the best out in them.
Yeah.
And typically charity, those are really good people. They're already there because they want to help.
Right.
And so I think that may have helped accelerate my process. Now, I'll say 6 months I was feeling better. I started to see, we talk about the valley of death, and the depths and how dark it is. And it really is true. I mean, I remember that first fall. It was just bleak and nothing to look forward to. So at 6 months, I would start to see some parting of the clouds. It wasn't like, I'm all better and ready to go. And even now, there's still things that I struggle with a little bit off and on.
Sure.
Excuse me. So if you want, I want to talk a little bit about, or if it's okay, about the dark side of grief.
Absolutely. I think it's important.
Yeah. So, and I've learned a lot, more than I wanted to, about suicide. There's a professor of psychology here at UT. He's retired now, but we've become friends as well. Kind of, again, funny that I'm hanging out with psychologists, but I learned from him that there's 5 factors that social workers, psychologists, et cetera, will look for when somebody's grieving. Number 1 is, are you 65 or older? Well, check, I'm 69 now.
Okay.
Number 2 is, you live alone. Yeah, no kids, or, in some cases, kids are out of the house. Number 3 and number 4, access to alcohol and firearms. Check and check.
Okay.
The big one, and this is where my professor of psychology, when I mentioned the 5th one, he says, that's the big one, is your mail.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we talked a little bit about that the way we're raised is, little girls cry, we tend to bottle it up, and basically you're not allowing yourself to move forward, to rebuild, to heal, to however you want to describe it.
Right.
And there's typically a 2-year period of this downward cycle where people can fall into a disease of despair.
Mm-hmm.
Can be suicide, alcoholism. Alcoholism's a slow form of suicide. Homelessness, divorce. I mean, in your case, for example, with Connor, and so it is something that we need to be cognizant of, and that's why I feel it is so important for people not to withdraw, not to be ashamed of their grief, to be ashamed of shedding a tear. It's very natural. In fact, I feel it's a true sign of strength to be willing to share your story, to shed a tear in public. It's something we got to go through.
Yeah.
And if not, you can hurt yourself like the one woman I mentioned is just missing her grandkids growing up. Mm-hmm. But it could be even worse. And it may not be conscious suicide. It could be just the psychosomatic effects on your body of, thinking of what I was going through when I was eating so much and lost 20 pounds.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable.
No.
And no sleep, and, your body's just going to find a way of collapsing, whether it's some sort of disease or a heart attack or what have you,
Yep.
even if it's not self-inflicted like a suicide. So that's one of the things I think is very important for people. If they're having dark thoughts, they definitely need to reach out. There's suicide hotline, or talk to a family member or a close friend, even your neighbor.
Yeah.
Just it's okay to ask for help. And like I said, if people see you're struggling, they'll jump in. They want to help.
Oh, there's no doubt.
Yeah, it brings the best out of people.
Yep. I'm with you. People do. They want to help, and I couldn't agree more with you that asking for help is a sign of strength. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where I am now is, and actually there's a book I wanted to mention. A minister friend gave it to my brother. He read it, gave it to me. It's called Good Grief.
Okay.
Granger something or other. It's like $6 on Amazon. There's a little bit of a spiritual aspect to it, but most of it is, it's written by a minister, but he's also a psychologist.
Okay.
And we always hear about the 5 phases of, but this book is a little different. There's actually 10 things he goes through. And he tells you up front, he says, number 1, grief can be brought upon you for a number of reasons. It could be losing a loved one. It could be a sudden job loss at, a job you loved and you worked for 30 years, a divorce. There's all kinds of things that bring on grief.
Right.
And then there's typically 10 things that people will experience. But he says, not in any order and not to the same degree.
Yep.
But that was one of the first things I read. It was very early on in my journey. And what I found was, like the dream thing. We're talking about that. Oh, wow, maybe I am normal and I have, I'll get through this, right? I read the 10 things and I thought most of them I experienced. Some of them I went through fairly quickly. Some of them, there was one, I forget which one it was, I didn't experience at all. But the big one, the hard one to get over, is accepting that life will never be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And the key to it, though, is, again, the psychosomatic aspect and focusing on the positive side. And the reason the book is entitled Good Grief is grief can be good if you deal with it and grow through it. And I'm at the point now in my life where I realize, and I've accepted, life will never be the same. It can't be.
Right.
But it doesn't mean it can't be good. And you just got to go out and figure out how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a process. It's a journey. It's not an overnight thing. We all have to find our own path. You're doing these podcasts, and I applaud you for that. This is, it's a great thing of just sharing stories and helping people realize that, hey, we can be manly men, and we could still cry, right?
Sure.
We need to, it's a safety relief valve in a way, and moving forward and finding a path that eventually life will be good, and in some cases even better in a way. I feel I'm a better person now.
Yeah.
I was, kind of self-focused, and Jill was my purpose in life, but a lot of it was all about me as well. And now I find to really just get a great enjoyment out of helping people. So
it's a really good point that you make, because I do believe that, and I'm only a year into this journey now.
Yeah.
But dealing with it and working through it, walking with it, I think it does. It makes me think about. It makes me think about things differently. It makes me think about people differently. It has forced me to things that would drive me crazy or irritate me, that were dumb. Yeah, like I don't even think about those things anymore. It's like those are so inconsequential. Yeah. And so I'm with you. I believe that forcing yourself to go through the journey as much as you can make you I've said it a million times. I'm a different person now than I was before. I'll never be the same person again. Hopefully I'm a better person, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's also the flip side, when people push it to the side and don't deal with it. I met a handful of those folks, and they tend to live in a state of anger a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would rather be sad than angry for sure. So I'd rather push through the grief than shove it to the side.
Well, and again, we got to remind ourselves, Connor or my Jill, they don't want us to be sad. No. They want us to live our lives, to enjoy life.
Yep.
And so we're really, in a way, doing them a disservice if we allow ourselves to just fall into this state of anger and it's not healthy, and you're wasting your life.
Yeah.
And like you, I was kind of smiling. Everything's relative. Going through what I did with losing Jill that last 24 hours. Almost everything pales in comparison now.
Right.
Stuff that I used to get angry at traffic.
Right.
Now, if somebody cuts me off, I still react. We're human, right? We're going to react. But I don't go into a fit of rage
right.
and, the anger and or this whole election thing we just went through.
Yep.
It's like all you can do is vote and don't let it spoil your life.
Right.
So my question now is, I'm, as I said, content with my life, but where do we go from here?
Right.
And I don't know. And quite honestly, in a way, I don't care.
Yeah.
If, one of the people asked me, well, aren't you dating? I have one friend. Here's an example of how we're all different. Her husband shot himself 1.5 years ago, one of my best friends. What a horrible thing. And at least I didn't have the potential, the guilt of, she's thinking, what did I miss, et cetera.
Sure.
But a year and a half, she's dating, because it just, that's her journey.
Yeah.
She was lonely, wanted companionship. I have no interest in companionship right now. I'm busy. I have lots of friends. Now, someday, maybe I might meet somebody. And if I do, and we enjoy time together, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
I'm not going to worry about it if it doesn't happen or if it does happen. It just, it's one step at a time going forward and just making life the best possible that it can be. So that's kind of where I am now today. And thank you for inviting me to join you. And
absolutely. I'm glad that Petri connected us. And the other thing is, look, thank you for sharing your story and all this information, because it really is helpful. And when you sent me your series that you did for your church, it was well thought out. It was well presented. It was a lot of really good information. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad, that you brought that here, to share it on another platform. And it's going to reach more people, and people that need to hear it, people like me.
I really hope it does. In fact, that's why I did the series you talked about in the video recordings, is so it can be shared.
Yeah.
And there's the 4 different subjects, the immediate impact, rebuilding, the dark side, and then going forward. Mm-hmm. So if you run into somebody that is struggling with one of those 4, or, feel free to share those videos as well.
Absolutely.
I'm doing this to try to help people. And like you, I want it to have legs and, reach as many people as possible. Yeah. So was there anything else that maybe I gleaned over a little too quickly, or?
I can't think of anything. There's one thing kind of going back to, everything for you happened so suddenly.
Yeah.
And I am curious, you briefly mentioned that you had some friends around you, but I'm a big community guy. Like, community for me is super important. And, and for me personally, going through the grieving process, community is incredibly important for me. And I always like to know, like, what was your community like? Like, who showed up? What did they do that you thought was good? Was there anybody that you thought was going to show up but didn't?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so for me, we didn't have a lot of close friends locally. So we have a lot of close friends, but I was a corporate gypsy. We moved a lot.
Right.
And so my closest friends, good friends, were in Rockport or Houston, family. They're all over the world, literally.
Okay.
And so that was an issue for me, not having the closeness. Plus, we had the lockdown on top of it.
That's right. I keep forgetting that. Yeah. That's a whole nother dynamic. Yeah.
So we even if people were close, now my neighbor, he's a practicing psychologist. I saw him in the driveway a couple of weeks after Jill passed, and he said, "Hey, how are you guys doing?" And I thought, "Oh, I got to tell him," and I just totally lost it. Back then the grief was just raw, just pure open wound, and the next day the doorbell rings, and he came over, and we stood on the porch 10 feet away, but he just came over to check up on me. And he's the first one that told me about the 5 factors. And he said, "Well, you have a number of them, but I think where you are, you're okay." And then he checked up on me again 6 months later. But one of the things that I found is, and this is one of the hard things of our journey, is the first 3 months, I had a huge outpouring of phone calls and texts and cards. And now some of my friends, I couldn't return the call. I
Yeah.
wasn't ready to talk. But
Right.
just knowing that they were reaching out.
Mhm.
The problem is about 3 months into it, everybody goes back to their lives.
Yeah.
And, and I'm alone.
Mm-hmm.
There was one friend, and ironically, we had drifted apart a little bit. That's down in San Antonio. He texted me every week.
Yeah.
Just, hey, I know you're not ready to talk. Let me know when you are. We'd love to have you come visit. Just knowing that somebody was there and cared. And so I mentioned my friend Janet, her husband shot himself. I learned from this friend in San Antonio. I texted her every week. And it was a year before we actually talked.
Wow.
Yeah, but just to let her know.
It's huge.
Yeah,
It's-
so I
yeah.
think that's one thing. If you are close to somebody, reach out to them, but don't forget.
Yeah.
Just keep reaching out to them and let them know. The other thing is, people have to be a little careful about what they say. There's the, I know she's in a better place. Well, you don't know what I'm thinking, what my background is. My advice is to just keep it simple. I'm
Mhm.
sorry for your loss. Let me know if there's something I can do.
Yeah.
If you want to talk, let me know. Period.
Mhm.
Just keep it simple. One of my wife's friends in Chicago, she was at the funeral up near Chicago where my wife is from, and her sister's there. And my wife and her sister were very close. And my friend approached her sister and said, I'm sorry you guys didn't finish on a good, in a good place. But what had happened was several months before, there was a little bit of a dispute over a family business.
Mm.
But they had moved completely beyond it. I mean, Jill loved her sister,
Right.
and I can't believe that this friend, she meant well, but it was devastating to Jill's sister
Yeah.
that she thought that Jill was still mad at her. And I'm like, no. She finally, after several glasses of wine, she finally opened up and shared that with me. And I'm like, and I'm so glad she did, because I told her, I said, no, that was just a misunderstanding, and she had moved beyond it. They had a great conversation on the phone the day before Jill passed. So, reach out, but be careful.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And look, I always tell people, and I've been on the opposite side. I've had friends that have gone through a loss. Avoiding saying, quote unquote, triggering things for sure.
Yeah.
Is smart. Keep it simple. I like that, and the other one is people do say things that are nonsensical sometimes. And in the early stages, sometimes it annoyed me, but I've really gotten good at just trying to understand what their intention is and not focusing on, word for word what they said. It's really what they meant. So I think there's two sides to the coin. So
Yeah.
when your friend's grieving, keep it simple. Just be there, be present. And then, when you're the one grieving, don't lash out when somebody, if somebody's making an effort to
Yeah.
support you,
Yeah.
acknowledge the effort and focus a little less on maybe the words. Right?
That's a great point, because, people do mean well.
Yes.
They just say, like in our neighbor, our ex-neighbor's case, say stupid things.
Sure.
But she's just trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
And again, it's focusing on the positive side of the coin. Don't react to how the words hurt you or affect you.
Right.
Just focus on the intent behind it, and they mean well, and just let it go as best you can.
Yep.
It may be hurtful, or it may bring up something that you really don't want to think about. Like, for example, my friend, whose husband shot himself, there's things she doesn't want to be reminded of.
Mm-hmm.
And, we got to be careful about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it goes both ways.
It
That's a
does.
great point,
Yeah.
Mike, that, be careful if you're trying to help somebody, but that if somebody's trying to be helpful, focus on that aspect and not the actual words.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, at least that's where I've landed for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, that's good advice in all walks of life.
It's true. Yeah.
A little tangent, but when I was working, I'd have a couple employees that get into these email battles, lobbing grenades over the fence and escalating. And I'm like, just sit down and talk it through.
Yeah.
And, don't focus on the words, focus on why are they asking or why are they saying what they're saying. And that gives you the best clue of how to work around it.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that is good advice.
Awesome. Well, the foundations, everything's going well then, and you're still staying active with all of them?
Oh, yeah.
That's great. Good for you.
Yeah, I'm probably spending a lot more money than my wife would like. She was a frugal Midwestern farm girl.
Okay.
I married wisely,
Yeah.
but it's going great. I'm very active. Like I mentioned, I've got a couple of studies going, and you mentioned Petrie. I'm very active with his organization,
Yep.
and it's fun, and I enjoy it.
Yeah.
We never had kids, but we love kids, so I just love being around kids. And then the scholarships, and through that, I've met a lot of people, gotten involved. And I get to go to some cool stuff.
That's great.
Yeah, I got to go to the President Hartzell's tailgate at the governor's mansion.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, hosted by Governor Abbott for
Wow.
the Georgia game. Now, unfortunately, the game didn't go the way we wanted it to.
We don't have to talk about that. That's
yeah,
okay.
exactly. But yeah, so it's life is good, and I'm busy. I tell people it's interesting being retired. They ask me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, it's kind of funny that for somebody that has absolutely nothing to do of how busy I am."
Yeah, those two things don't add up, but I can understand why you actually have a lot to do.
Well, and again, it's, I think, rebuilding, right? Just keep moving.
Yeah.
And, not everything's going to work out. I've had one of the charities, we kind of backed away from a little bit because the fit just wasn't, some of the things I wanted to bring to the table to help them, they weren't interested in. So now I'm working with a different charity.
Yeah.
And so, it's not that everything's going to work out.
Right.
But, again, God can't steer a parked car.
That's
Just
right.
Keep moving, keep trying.
Trying different things, absolutely.
And you'll find your path.
Yep, there's no doubt. Words of wisdom. Well, Chris, thank you so much for sharing the story. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing with information, being honest, with your experience, and then, all the charity work you're doing. It's fantastic, man. I admire you a lot. Well,
thank you, Mike. And likewise, I like telling my story because I do want to help people. And, I'm really glad that we found this opportunity to work together and create a podcast that hopefully people will find helpful. So that's what it's all about.
That's the goal.
Yep.
All right. Thanks so much, Chris.